This is Nice Work. I'm Tyler Lake.
And I'm Kate Young.
Hey, Kate, you ever get out into the Hoosier National Forest?
Yeah, sometimes.
Well, I did an interview about the environmental activist Andy Mahler. He spent roughly 40 years helping to keep the Hoosier National Forest wild.
And he's the subject of a new book by Bloomington writer Steve Higgs.
He sure is, and that book really helped me appreciate the forest and all the people who helped preserve it.
That's great. And in keeping with the environmental theme, I went out to the White Violet Center for Eco-Justice, just outside of Terra Haute.
I hear there were alpacas involved?
Yes, alpacas whose fleece is incredibly soft and perfect for their fiber arts program.
And our co-host Alex Chambers is really bucking the environmental trend by talking to musician Gabriel Jenks about the new music Ensemble.
Alex always needs to be different.
A real showboat, that one.
Totally. But he gets a pass because it's a great story.
Well, we should get to it then. All that coming up on Nice Work after this. I'm Tyler Lake, and you're listening to Nice Work. My interview today is with Steve Higgs, a writer, photographer, and journalist who's lived in Bloomington and written about southern Indiana for a very long time. You may have read his work in the Herald Times when he reported there for years, or maybe he helped teach you how to become a journalist. He certainly taught me and a whole host of IU journalism students. Or maybe you've explored the state by way of his guides covering the natural areas of Indiana. Steve's career is long and varied and very interesting. And we're going to get to that later. But we're going to start with his most recent book about his close friend and environmental activist. It's called Andy Mahler and the Hoosier National Forest, the folk hero and the forest he loves. To get there, let's set a scene. It's the mid-1980s, and we're in Orange County. Not the conservative coastal enclave, this one's in Indiana, and it's a conservative, mostly rural enclave. To be exact, we're in Paoli, county seat, and we're here for a meeting. There are plenty of locals milling around, a lot of them from out in the county. Farmers and people who put a premium on rural privacy. But there is one guy, sore-thumbing his way through the crowd. He looks a bit like a hippie, certainly to most people there. He's tall and sharp-eyed, tangles of dark hair, and distractingly handsome. His name is Andy Mahler, a descendant of the composer Gustav Mahler, and the son of a college professor nicknamed Mr. Mitochondria. He was, by all accounts, open-hearted, kind, and generous. But as open-hearted as he seemed to be, it's hard to imagine that even Andy thought he would be on the same page as everyone else in that meeting. But that changed over the course of the next couple of hours. He would leave that meeting convinced he had a lot in common with him. And what was the meeting about? Well, it was about all-terrain vehicles in the Hoosier National Forest.
Somebody put a tiny little notice in the Paoli newspaper down there saying we're going to have a meeting downtown at the community center about this off-road vehicle plan. He said there was a deluge, a foot of water, little exaggeration, in the streets of Paoli, but said the place was completely packed with all these people. And he realized, because he and Linda
Lee is Andy's wife and partner, and a big reason why he moved down to Orange County in the first place.
we're these kind of Bloomington hippies who moved down here. We're not going to tell people what to do. Yeah. That's just not going to be our role. But at that meeting that night in Paoli, he realized that not only was the other sort of back to the earth people from that period who moved down there for the same reasons Andy did, but so were the local folks.
Right.
And at that meeting, they also learned about the 1985 clear-cutting plan. And between those two things, that got Andy involved in that, which he was involved in until the day he died a couple months ago.
The way Higgs tells it, like many folk heroes, or Mel Gibson characters, Andy was thrust into a lifelong battle not because of lofty ideals, but because the problem came to his door. ATVs roaring and bombing across the idyllic stretch of Orange County that Andy and Linda called the lazy black bear.
Environmental activists are almost never politically or ideologically driven. They are victims of environmental events. And for Andy Mahler, he was a victim of the off-road vehicle trails. They weren't planning the off-road vehicle trails right at the Lazy Black Bear, but at that time, off-road vehicles were all over the Hoosier National Forest, and they had a thing they called the chicken mud run, where they would race right up Andy's driveway into the forest and race the ORVs all around his property. And so that was what initially got him involved in it.
It wasn't too long after that that Higgs met Mahler. And the Hoosier National Forest, or as Higgs often calls it, the Hoosier, and the efforts to conserve it brought the two together.
I was a master's student at the IU School of Journalism in 1984 and 1985 when the U.S. Forest Service proposed its management plan that would have clear-cut 81% of the entire Hoosier National Forest over a 120-year period, would have established off-road vehicles and trails in Orange County and Brown County, and would have opened up 90% of the forest for oil and gas leasing, even though there's maybe a 1% chance of there being any oil or gas anyplace on the forest. Andy and his lifelong partner and wife, Linda Lee, were foundational in establishing the Protect Our Woods group down there that is still active today to oppose those trails. So I went to journalism school to be an environmental writer, and I wrote my final master's project was called Clear Cutting the Hoosier National Forest, Professional Forestry or Panacea, which also became my first Sunday centerpiece in what was then the Bloomington Herald Telephone in 1985, because I was doing them both at the same time. And I met Andy at that time and interviewed him, and he was a part of my very first significant reporting project.
Over the last 40 years or so, Mahler was pretty relentless in his quest to protect the Hoosier National Forest. And he helped save a lot of other wildlands along the way. A lot of it through organizations that he helped found, including Protect Our Woods and Heartwood.
Their organizing efforts, Protect Our Woods, Forest Watch, which was formed in Brown County, the Hoosier Environmental Council up in Indianapolis, and the entire statewide environmental community, I mean from all four corners of the state, everybody rose up to fight this. And the Hoosier National Forest became the very first national forest in the country to permanently ban off-road vehicles forever. And it still is that way. I'm not sure if any other forests have done it, but that was the first one that they did. Ultimately, they stopped the 1985 clear-cutting plan. The Forest Service withdrew it completely, appointed a new Forest Service director, a guy named Frank Voitas, who was part of a new group called New Perspectives, which saw multiple use being non-extractive uses of the forest. And so he was appointed the National Forest Supervisor. And by 1992, 7 years after it had been proposed, that plan had been withdrawn completely and was replaced by the Conservationist Alternative, which was written by a guy named Jeffrey St. Clair, who's now the editor of Counterpunch, who, under a grant from the Hoosier Environmental Council up in Indianapolis, to write the Conservationist Alternative Management Plan that to this day is still the overarching framework for Hoosier National Forest management. So after they had won those victories, Andy and his friends realized, okay, if we dramatically reduce logging in Indiana, that's going to increase pressure on national forests in Illinois and Kentucky and Ohio. And in 1992, they formed Heartwood, which is still active today. Heartwood represented all of these groups, was sort of a center for all this grassroots organizing in all these states, and over a period of years, for different lengths of time, shut down logging in national forests from Missouri to Pennsylvania to Alabama. In Illinois, in the Shawnee National Forest, a judge over there actually shut down logging for 17 years. There wasn't a single tree harvested in the Shawnee National Forest over a 17-year period, inspired by Heartwood activism. In 2021, Andy was retired from activism, which is an overstatement. He was always active. But he had to come out of retirement because now the U.S. Forest Service has plans to clear cut, burn, and chemically spray I believe it's 80,000 acres of national forest land. So he had to come out of retirement, and to this day, they still have not done any of that in the Buffalo Springs area, 4 years later. So the fight is never over. David Brower, the legendary founder of Friends of the Earth and environmentalist, said, when they win, it's permanent. When we win, it's merely a stay of execution.
Mahler and the activists he worked with helped preserve wild spaces across the country. And Higgs portrays Mahler as a relentless and dedicated advocate, one with a trick up his sleeve. I had mentioned earlier that Mahler was good-looking, and he was, but he was also charismatic and charming and intelligent. And like it or not, those traits can go a long way in getting other people to change their minds.
For example, U.S. Congressman Frank McCloskey, when the clear-cutting plan was still happening, U.S. Congressman Frank McCloskey asked Andy, I want to ask a question of my constituents about logging on the Hoosier. What should I ask? Well, and this is all in the book, of course. And Andy tells him, well, Frank, ask what's never been asked before. Do you approve or disapprove of logging in the Hoosier National Forest? Well, they sanitized the question a little bit. And Andy, as Andy says, we would have been thrilled if 50% of the respondents would have said, we don't want any logging. 70% of Frank McCloskey's constituents from Bloomington to Evansville, 70% of them said, we don't want any logging in the Hoosier National Forest. Following that, by the time this was all done, all but one U.S. senator and congressman in the state of Indiana, there was a Republican banker from Covington named John Myers who didn't sign it, but everybody else signed a letter to the U.S. Forest Service, not using Andy's name, but sent this letter to the U.S. Forest Service chief saying, we want the Hoosier National Forest managed Andy Mahler's way. And and Frank McCloskey made this announcement. They've always had what they call powwows down there, which are forest gatherings once a year. McCloskey came down there with a big Protect Our Woods banner behind him and announced the results of this poll out there, and that was really the final straw in the plan. And that was Andy saying to Frank, here's what you should ask him. And so there's just a million little things like that. I mean, he was host of Interchange, the longest-running public affairs program at WFHB. He and others, but he was always up here doing that. He was instrumental in creating the Lost River Co-op in Delhi down in Orange County. In fact, he initially, I just learned this week, wanted Blooming Foods to be a part of it, but they didn't want to expand. So after working up here to help create Blooming Foods, he went down there and created the Lost River. And there's a million little things that I don't even know about.
He certainly left an indelible impression on Higgs.
He is hands down the most remarkable human being that I've ever met. On any level. I mean, I knew that about him just from having known him and writing about him for all these years. I didn't know his family history. He was a first-generation American. His parents escaped Nazi Austria in 1938. His father came to the United States alone at age 17. His mother came here alone at age 13. So from that, one generation, here's a Mahler living down in Orange County at the end of a dead-end county road that actually has a Forest Service gate blocking the driveway, completely surrounded by the Hoosier National Forest. So his family history, on top of everything else, just blew me away. His father was an IU professor whose nickname was Mr. Mitochondria. When he passed, his colleagues, the faculty council, what they wrote about him said, to even understand what Henry Mahler did, you have to have a solid fundamental understanding of the biochemistry behind it because it was so complicated. Learning that family history alongside of what I just put everything that I've known about Andy into perspective, his brilliance, his dedication, his focus, I mean, everything about him just flowed from his family life story.
How does a guy with that history end up in the woods in Orange County?
Well, it's interesting. Also, a part of my talk, I talk about how completely different Andy and I are as human. We were born 2 months apart in 1951. Coincidentally, the same year that the Hoosier National Forest was established. We all three were born in 1951. And I grew up on the east side of Indianapolis, working class. All my friends' fathers were factory workers and carpenters and that sort of thing. Andy grew up on the Professor East side of Bloomington at the same time. But the only thing we have in common is we trace our love of trees, which led us both to the Hoosier National Forest, as climbing trees when we were kids. And he traces his love of trees and his ultimate activism to that. He moved to Orange County in like 1987 to the Lazy Black Bear is the name of the property that he had lived to live on down there. And he moved there in 1987 basically to get away from the city. He actually said, not in this book, but I have 3 times this amount of information on him. He said that at that time that he wanted to move away from a place where everybody was 18 years old. A place where you could actually grow up is how he described moving down there.
Right.
But he and his whole group of people, there was a legendary music group here called the Bloomington Old Time Music and Dance Group or Club or something like that.
Okay.
That Andy was instrumental in forming. And that all transferred down there to where the Lazy Black Bear became this sort of national center for traditional folk music. In fact, the Lotus Art Festival,
Right.
the Lotus Music and Arts Festival is named after an Orange County fiddler named Lotus Dickey. That's where Lotus comes from. So he was a part of that old-time music and dance thing, and the Lazy Black Bear became, like the center, certainly in southern Indiana, for that type of music.
Higgs' book puts Andy Mahler center stage, but he demonstrates the value of his work by taking a reader through the vast wilds of the Hoosier National Forest. A close-up look at what Higgs calls a rewilded green jewel.
This book is actually 2 tales. One, when I learned that Andy had stage 4 cancer back in 2023, I believe, I reached out to him and said, would you be interested in an article, which ended up leading to this book. But the book is actually 2 tales. It's that story of me telling Andy's life, going all the way back to his he's a descendant of Gustav Mahler, the Bohemian composer. That entire story, but the other part of it is about the Hoosier National, which is parts of a book that I actually wrote for IU Press under contract on nothing but the Hoosier National Forest. It was called Rewilding Southern Indiana. And it was a story of how the Hoosier National Forest had been completely decimated in the late 19th and early 20th century, has been saved and is now rewilded and is back to a state of being rewilded. So the parts of the book focusing on the history and the natural characteristics of the Hoosier are taken from that book that I wrote in 2019 is when they decided they weren't going to publish it.
You make a really great case, not just for the environmental protection of a space like the Hoosier National Forest, but for the space itself. You go through and talk about some of the places in the park that are worth preserving.
The most important part of this whole story is that the Hoosier National Forest, at 204,000 acres, is the largest public landholding in the state of Indiana. And it's all forest. There are some lakes and there are, some wetlands and that sort of thing. But for the most part, it's all upland forest, unlike anything else in the state of Indiana or in the United States, in fact. We have our own unique little ecosystem here. The Hoosier National stretches from Brown County and the northern shore of Lake Monroe all the way down to the Ohio River. It goes through 9 counties. Now, when you look at a map, it looks like this big, massive national park that takes up a fourth of the entire state. That's not the case. The Hoosier National Forest has 2 very large sections up here in Brown and Monroe County and around Lake Monroe and down into Jackson and Lawrence counties. And then down in Perry County, there's a place called Mogan Ridge that is incredibly wild as well down there. But other than that, the National Forest is mostly smaller parcels that are scattered throughout that whole area there. And the Hoosier National Forest actually has more miles of boundary between the National Forest and private landowners of any national forest in the country. Because you'll have a mile square section down in Lawrence or Jackson County that's completely surrounded by farms, and you're from that area, you know what I'm talking about here. So it's a very unique forest. It's also one of the smallest. When they proposed the 85 plan, it was the smallest in the country. So it is the only place in the state of Indiana where we can actually have old-growth forest. 88 acres down in Orange County, just south of Paoli, called the Pioneer Mothers Memorial Forest, is the largest stand of native hardwood timber in the state of Indiana. 88 acres, that's all that's left.
I stop as often as I can when I go through there, and it's a beautiful little stretch of woods.
That place was known as Cox Woods, and like most natural areas in the state of Indiana that still exist today, they were owned by private landowners who fiercely protected them and saved them and preserved them. Cox's family in the early 1900s actually sold the property to a Louisville timber company. And a civic organization in Orange County called the Pioneer Mothers worked with the U.S. Forest Service, raised money to buy the property back, and then get from the timber company, and then deeded it to the Forest Service for protection in perpetuity. I don't think it would take an act of Congress to change the management there like it would in the Dean Wilderness, but it's protected forever. And it is, and not only is it the largest stand of native hardwood timber, down on the Lick Creek, which is on the eastern end of it, archaeologists have found evidence of a woodland-era Indian settlement on the creek there. And just up the road from that, there is an African-American settlement called the Roberts Thomas Farm, these settlements were actually all over Indiana in the pre-Civil War. Blacks would escape from the South, accompanied by Quakers, and came to places like Orange County, which had a very heavy Quaker influence, which is why it's such a unique and amazing place down there. So within this one little span down there, you've got the largest stand of native hardwood timber in the state. You have a woodland Indian settlement site and an African-American farm site.
It's an example of a very early version of the kind of environmentalism that Andy was doing.
Exactly. I mean, in fact, the settlements down there began right after 1800 when Indiana became a territory. It's only 30, 50 miles from the Ohio River, and so that was one of the first areas that was settled. It's just got an unbelievably rich history, and with the Quaker influence, it's really unique in the state of Indiana.
After Mahler was diagnosed with cancer, Higgs dedicated himself to the book, spending as much time with Mahler down at the Lazy Black Bear as possible.
The cancer diagnosis came in the spring of 2024. When I heard about it, and it's stage 4 cancer, there was never going to be anything. The end of his life was right here, right in his face. So I reached out to him and I said, would you be interested in talking about this? Which, of course, he was. I knew he would be. And so I went down in June of 2024, and we did our first hike down there where we talked about his diagnosis, his views on life and love, and just his whole philosophy. He and I walked around with his new little dog, Wagner. There are 2 pictures of Wagner in the book, I believe. We walked around the property down there and just sat and talked about, his thing. That became an article that we published in Counterpunch called Metaphor of the Cicadas. And it also is the first chapter in the book here. So from that point on, Andy and I, and one of the things that he said in that interview that has sort of become one of my life mantras here is he said, every second is an opportunity for extraordinary depth and fulfillment of purpose. And that really struck me. I'm 74 years old. Every day I'm writing about somebody who has died, somebody, I hear about somebody who's sick and is dying. So that really struck a chord with me. And knowing that there was a deadline here, the deadline literally being his life, okay, I applied that principle and spent the next, from June until September when it came out, focused on nothing but that book. And I hung out with Andy at least 9 different times on hikes and talks that he gave, a protest that he helped lead down in Bedford, playing music. I actually went to the Indiana Democratic conclave they do down in French Lick every year. Andy received a legacy award from the Orange County Democrats. He also at one time twice ran for county commissioner in Orange County. He was never elected. So over that year and a half, a little less than a year and a half, Andy Mahler was my focus. We corresponded all the time. I went down there. We went on hikes. I believe I probably went for his last hike in the woods when Ann Kibler wrote the article for Limestone Post. Andy Mahler, folk hero of the forest, I think she called it. She and I went down there. We sat at his house at the Lazy Black Bear and talked for a while, and then we did a drive of the Buffalo Springs area. He wasn't able really to walk. We parked and we walked down this road to an old pioneer cemetery down there and talked. Came back to the car, drove around another spot, got out of the car once and talked. And he had just started having he had prostate cancer that had spread to his hip and his bones. And he had just started having severe pain at that time. And Ann and I actually dropped him off at the doctor's office on the way out of town. A couple of weeks later, he was in hospice. And from that point forward, the last 2 or 3 times I went down there, I knew there was going to come a time when I would go down to the Lazy Black Bear and I would just be sitting at Andy's bedside. And so that happened. I think it was in July. I took my grandkids down there. And for over the next 2 or 3 weeks, that was in July. He died on August 30th. So about 6 weeks there, he was bedridden the whole time. And I went down there and had another couple of interviews with him, the last one being about his life, love, and lifetime partner, Linda Lee. That was the last time I was down there. A very touching moment. The time before that, he said to me, "I hope I live long enough to hold a copy of this book in my hand." Well, the last time that I went down there before he was comatose, I had the second draft of the book that was printed out enough, and there's the picture, the very last picture in the book is of him holding that in his hands. So we reached that goal, but he died before the final version of the book actually came out. But like I say, I was there that afternoon. I mean, somebody had told me, he's no longer responding. The prognosis is not looking good. I got that message on over the weekend, and I went down immediately the next day and, was at his bedside. And like I say, he died a few hours after I left. So from 1985 in graduate school to his bedside, it was an amazing, incredible journey that you know what it's like being a journalist. The best part of the journey, as I told my students, my entire teaching career, the best part of journalism is the people that you meet and get to talk to.
If you know anything about Higgs, you know he loves journalism. He's a reporter through and through, dyed in the wool with genuine artifacts. And much of his life has been devoted to reporting. Over the years, he's written thousands of articles, columns, and essays. He's published 4 books and has amassed a, massive archive.
I audio recorded every conversation.
You audio recorded every
Audio
conversation.
recorded the whole thing. And, for most of my career, I would sit down, you might remember me saying this in class, anytime you go to transcribe a tape, expect 3 to 4 hours of just transcription before you get it done.
Yeah.
Well, one of the wonderful things about digital technology is transcription technology. I put it I uploaded it to the computer, ran it through a program, and there it was in a Word document that was, I would say, 95% accurate. So all of that, and I have all this. In fact, we can talk about the archives. Did you know about that?
No. Yeah, tell me about it.
IU Archives is going to be home to my papers. It wasn't a conversation. She just said, we want it all.
Wow.
And that includes all of my teaching materials as well. And of course, you remember I created J155, the first serious all-online class on the IU Bloomington campus. They're going to be getting all of this information, and all this Andy stuff will be a part of that. But the way this happened was they are going to get Andy's papers. And I wrote Jim Capshew, who I've known forever.
James Capshew is a professor emeritus of history at IU.
And I said, Jim, I hear you're taking Andy's papers. Would you be interested in my stuff? And I sent him this spreadsheet. And 2 days ago, she said, we want it all. And if you want to give it to us today, we'll take it.
Wow, so you're going in the archives.
So I'm going in the archives. 50, 100 years from now, some researcher might say, hey, listen to what this old guy had to say back in the 20th century. But the problem is I write about the Indiana and the Indiana environment, which nobody could care less about except a handful of us.
Well, once it's all gone,
I know,
you'll be the archive.
That's what I'm thinking. I wrote a book called 20 Years of Crimes Against Democracy in 2009. I was writing about the emerging police state in the early 2000s when the Indiana State Police surveilled and stalked me because they didn't like something I was writing about.
Congratulations! That's a big deal.
It's just sort of started dawning on me exactly what that means. But as long as they have space, my work is going to live long after me.
That was Stephen Higgs, and the book is called Andy Mahler and the Hoosier National Forest. You can get it at stevehiggs.com. And if you want to go check out the Hoosier National Forest, follow through on that. I don't think you're going to regret it. again, I want to thank Steve for coming in and throwing a compliment my way that I am much too vain not to play for you right now.
Right, you're one of my star students.
Oh, star! I don't know about all that.
I don't know if you know this or not, but I created a writer's manual and style guide for classes, and one of your leads was in that book for probably the last 15, from the time that you were my student until the time I retired 4 years ago.
Oh, I had no idea. That's great to hear. I'm Tyler Lake, and this is Nice Work.
This is Nice Work. I'm Kate Young. Anytime I've had the chance to visit the White Violet Center for Eco-Justice out at St. Mary of the Woods College near Terra Haute, it always feels like I'm stepping back in time. They've got a sophisticated farm set up, growing food and flowers. They use the latest research and up-to-date farming methods. But there's something about the quality of the buildings and what happens inside those buildings that takes me back to a slower-paced lifestyle of the past. I've been to White Violet Center before to talk about growing food and baking bread, but this time I got to focus on their fiber arts program, which starts out in the barn with a small herd of charismatic alpacas.
Hi.
Alpacas are kind of funny looking, with long necks, huge eyes full of personality, and a floppy mop on top of their heads.
What's with the little thing on top of their heads? That's so cute.
So, yeah, it's a part of their style that apparently the fifth grade boys are adopting. Actually, I think it's just like the style now of haircut, but we go to the fifth grade field days with the Vigo County Soil and Water Conservation District, and every time, like we've been coming in the last couple of years, and they'll be like, why does this alpaca have my haircut? And I'm like, they've had it for longer, so why do you have their haircut? But yes, part of the reason is to protect those giant eyes, but also just because they have such good style. It is a little bit of a false advertisement because all you want to do is pet it, and
They don't like it.
They don't. No, they're like, oh, we want you to admire us from afar. So the neck or the upper part of the back is their preference if you have to, if you must, and if you could come with food, they're going to be a little bit more willing.
That's Tara Elmore. She's the Director of Outreach and Programs and the Animal Care Team Manager. She introduced me to Georgiana.
She's our media specialist, so she knows what to do and how to do it, and as long as there's food. Again, she's my pay to play. Yeah. There you go. Oh, and if you'd like to feed her, feel free.
Alpacas are related to llamas, but they're about half the size, and they're bred for their fibers, which are incredibly soft. They are quiet animals. I didn't capture any braying on tape. They are noisy eaters, but generally quite gentle, and they do a lot of important work for the farm.
The alpacas are great land managers. We are able to use their manure to put nutrients back into the soil. They are very gentle when they're eating. They don't pull the grass up by its roots. These are all the important components to why we have these animals along with the fiber, but also they do make really good agritourism animals as well.
The land management aspect is why the Sisters of Providence originally wanted them on the farm.
I am Candace Minster, and I am the Flower and Fiber Arts Manager for White Violet Center for Eco-Justice. When White Violet Center was first founded 30 years ago, this year is our 30th anniversary, the idea was that it would be a farm. It would be organic and as sustainable as possible. There would be livestock to generate basically waste that could be recycled and put back onto the fields where we would be growing food plants.
The founder, Sister Ann Sullivan, wanted an animal that would be no-kill, something that could generate income but not need to be processed regularly. She was looking for a fiber animal. When she visited a farm with alpacas, she fell in love, and they seemed to be a good fit.
The benefits were that they are soft-footed, so they don't tear up the pastures. They tend to just cut the grass. They don't pull it up as they're grazing, and their manure is pretty easy on the nitrogen. It tends to not burn, and they are smaller. So in the beginning, it was just a few sisters who were running White Violet, so they needed to be able to manage whatever animal was here there themselves. The other benefit was their fiber, and their fiber is considered a luxury fiber. It's extremely soft and lightweight, very warm, and very valuable. So that was really the focus with bringing that animal in.
Candace leads the Fiber Arts program at White Violet. She's been involved with the center for 21 years. But she first got into fibers back when she lived in Bloomington.
When there was Yarns Unlimited, when that shop was still on the square, and I wandered in. I had learned how to crochet and knit from my mom when I was a kid, but I could never get the purl stitch. This was before YouTube and the internet being the way that it is, and I was looking at these little things like, how do I get this purl stitch? And so I just wandered in, and Suzanne Halverson, the owner at the time, was there, and she really kindly helped me. But when I walked in, I saw these looms, I saw the wheels. I was like, what is this magical place? And so, yeah, I started taking classes, learned how to weave from her, and learned to spin there, and yeah, brought it all here.
Somehow, she managed to find a position where weaving, spinning, and knitting are significant parts of her job. During the growing season, Candace runs the cut flower program at the center. But my visit was in January, and they were well into the winter season when they focus on fiber arts.
So this is what we call our loom room. And
the walls of the loom room are lined with golden glazed brick. The floor is an emerald green, durable linoleum with 6 gorgeous, solid maple floor looms arranged in a horseshoe. Candace was kind enough to demonstrate weaving on a loom that already had a piece in progress.
So the warp are the yarns, the ends that are going lengthwise through the loom. So they're attached at the front beam and then at the back beam. And when I press down on the treadle, it opens up. So you'll see some warp ends are raised, some are down low. And that lets me pass the shuttle, which has a bobbin on it of yarn, and this is what we call the weft. So the warp goes through the loom lengthwise, and the weft is running back and forth side to side. And then you have the beater, which will place the yarn, and then change it out, move to the next treadle, push the beater back, and then pass the shuttle through again. And then place it, move it on down the line. I usually weave barefoot, so I'm having a hard time with my shoes on. And then you pass it back through.
Just off the loom room is a collection of spinning wheels. They offer workshops on how to spin wool into yarn, but most of the alpaca fiber is sent out to a mill to be processed into fine yarn, some of which they color with natural plant dyes. The sisters, the staff, interns, and volunteers at White Violet make woven, knit, crocheted, and needle-felted items with the alpaca fiber and then sell them to support the center. They also sell produce at the local farmers market, and they have a farm store on site with food and handmade fiber pieces for sale. I was curious about how all of this relates to the mission of the Sisters of Providence and the White Violet Center for Eco-Justice.
One of the key tenets of what our mission is that we are caring for all of creation. And so we tend to be divorced from where our food comes from and where our fibers come from. How is our clothing made? What goes into it? And we just go to the store and we get the packaged food and we get the shirt that's hanging on the hanger, or we find the cheapest scarf we can. And when people come here and they get to see this farm where we do raise fibers and food, they can get a glimpse of we all eat by the grace of nature and we are clothed by the grace of nature as well. And so to see what goes into caring for an animal, we're trying to help people kind of make that connection.
That was Candace Minster, Flower and Fiber Arts Manager for White Violet Center for Eco-Justice at St. Mary of the Woods, just outside of Terre Haute. You can learn more about their work by following links on our website, ipm.org/nicework. Be sure to catch videos of weaving, spinning, and of course, alpacas. Follow at WFIU Official on Instagram and Facebook. I'm Kate Young. More nice work just ahead.
I always forget how lovely the mandolin is.
Yeah, it's really cool. And then there's all kinds of, fun. I kind of picked up a lot of Bach on it too, and it just does so beautifully,
The Goldberg?
No, that is the D minor partita,
D minor.
first movement from
Okay,
D minor partita
okay.
for solo violin.
And that is Gabriel Jenks.
I'm an associate professor of composition at the Jacobs School of Music, and I am a practicing musician, composer, writer, thinker, dancer.
And I'm Alex Chambers. And I invited Gabriel in because he's composed a piece that features the mandolin, and it premieres this week. He'll be performing as part of the Jacobs New Music Ensemble concert this Thursday, February 5th at 8 p.m. at Our Hall on the IU Bloomington campus. Gabriel, maybe we can start with the concert itself.
Sure, yeah. New Music Ensemble is always about all new works, basically. In fact, I think the oldest repertoire that it tends to perform hails from the latter half of the 20th century, at least as far as I've ever known. So that is pretty cool. And this concert will have all new works, including one by me, one by David Zubay, a few alum pieces, and all of these new pieces will actually be toured also in South Korea when we go there over spring break.
So tell me about your piece.
Sure.
Which is On the Run.
Yeah. I wanted to write a piece that featured the mandolin, which is a recent obsession of mine.
Uh-huh.
I took up all this fretted instrument business last summer, I guess it was, now 2 summers ago. I became really interested in the banjo first. Soon after that followed the mandolin, and I kind of knew that the mandolin might be something that I would really groove with, and indeed I was right.
Why is that?
Well, when I was really young, like 4, I started on the Suzuki violin. That was my first serious contact with an instrument.
I wondered if it might be a violin connection.
Yeah. Something about the tuning I knew I would immediately connect with. And
Because
the
mandolin has the same tuning as the violin.
Same tuning, so it's set up very much the same way. And then the other thing about it that I really, really loved was this very interesting timbral thing that it's got going on, which is partly due to the fact that it has 2 strings in each fifth. So it has 2 Gs, 2 Ds, 2 As, 2 Es. So it has this vaguely, buzzy sort of involuntarily microtonal aspect to it, which is incredibly attractive to me.
Yeah.
And I guess probably the idea of those unisons is more for the strength of sound than anything, I would imagine. But what ends up happening, which to me is far more interesting than the strength of the sound, is this subtle lack of totally in tuneness between those unisons, which will never be completely perfect because, of course, there's different humidity levels, different temperature levels, and then depending upon how hard you play it, it's going to go out of tune a little bit within a very short space of time, just like a harp does, which is my primary instrument.
And I think there's something maybe increasingly appealing about that as so much of our music becomes more electronic and able to be tuned perfectly, including people's voices in, post work and recording studios.
Absolutely. I think these weird little quirky sort of artifacts are so interesting to us. And the idea that we can hear the instruments sweat, in a sense, is really, really cool. And it kind of makes it feel real. It makes it feel as though we can empathize with the experience of that sound.
Yeah. So cool. And so is that what you're exploring in On the Run?
Yeah. So I was going to write kind of a mandolin concerto. The more that I thought about it, the more I thought, I'm not sure exactly if I would describe this as a concerto so much as a piece in which the mandolin is involved. And it's about the mandolin even a little bit. But I don't think that the mandolin part is soloistic enough really to qualify as a concerto. Part of that happened because my interest in the mandolin happened concurrent to my interest in songwriting. So the mandolin for me was a kind of an accompanimental instrument to a lyrically driven folk song idiom, really. So my exploration of it was before melodic harmonic. And so the idea of that sound laying a bed a bit for other things to be layered upon was very much a part of that concept. So the outer movements of the concerto are derived from sort of song-like things that I was writing, thinking, what would happen if I were to write songs that sounded very old? They sounded like songs that had been around for a really long time, sort of just traditions. And then kind of build upon that in a way that could translate to this sinfonietta ensemble.
Like old in the sense of not just American folk song old, but far older?
I think they're kind of American folk song-y.
Oh, okay.
I would describe them that way. I mean, I would put them in the category of sort of Appalachian folk music, I guess, is what I would say. They have that vibe to them. Yeah. So, I mean, you could describe the project as, my creating almost like false archives and then drawing on my own false archives. But in all cases, maybe with the exception of the middle movement, the mandolin is more of a signpost and accompanier than it is a solo voice.
That makes sense. Is there anything else that you want to add about the concert itself?
I think, just the fact that I'm just very excited to be part of what is promising to be a very diverse spread of music. And for me, that's very meaningful because it's been my main project of late, I would say in the last 5 years, really, to explore style as wholeheartedly and diversely as I possibly can. So instead of sort of saying to myself, which is, in a way the modernist project is to reject and then to kind of build something in the place of what you have rejected. Instead, to me, I suppose as a child of post whatever modernism, my project has been much more to exhaustively and lovingly learn about as many different styles as I can and then see what happens in my own alchemical test tubes.
Right, exactly. I definitely want to follow up on that. But in the meantime, the New Music Ensemble's concert is Thursday, February 5th at 8 p.m. in our hall. I've been speaking with composer Gabriel Jenks, who teaches at the Jacobs School of Music. And you want to tell us what we'll go out on?
So I think what I'll do, again, just play a tiny little passage maybe for the first movement and possibly a tiny passage from the last movement, depending upon whether I hold up with my tuning here. Tiny bit of the first movement.
There was a tiny
with
bit.
a whistling.
So great.
Let's see if I can remember the last movement here. So forth and so on.
So great. Thank you so much.
My
I'm excited
pleasure.
for this concert. For Nice Work, I'm Alex Chambers.
You've been listening to Nice Work, a production of WFIU, WTIU, and Indiana Public Media. Find us at ipm.org.
This episode was produced and edited by Tyler Lake. We get production help from Danny William, Holly Wilkerson, Carl Templeton, Leo Pies, Jillian Blackburn, and Jonah Ballard.
Our theme music was composed and performed by Alan Davis. Additional music from Universal Production Music. The executive producer is Eric Bolstridge. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Nice work, Tyler.
Nice work, Kate.